API strategy.
Is it API strategy or
I would say
API strategy?
API strategy
for decision
API strategy for decision makers.
Hi, Mike Amundsen here again with API strategy for decision makers. As you know, I recently got a chance to sit down with Derric Gilling, the CEO of Moesif, the leading API analytics and monetization platform. And we were talking about this whole process of the API lifecycle, this notion of discovery, adoption, designing for that first hello and for strategic applications, and then figuring out the pricing strategy, how you sell through developers, and then working through the full cycle of eventually deprecating old APIs for new. Let's pick up when we were talking about this notion of the developer moment, the aha moment. Let's listen in. Yeah, I think when we were talking about the API, the continuous API management book with the API Academy, we talked about this aha moment. I forget who taught it to us, whether it was Twilio or somebody else. They called it the Neo moment, when somebody goes, whoa, it's like they get that sort of rush. They get that little bit of rush. You're exactly right in the sense that that very first aha moment app is often not native to whatever your environment is. It's not integrated into your own platform yet. It's not solving a direct problem, but you kind of get this buzz of, hey, this thing works. And I know Twilio does this, and we talk about it a little bit in the report. And I know you do this in your product space, really monitoring that whole experience along, like finding out who signs up. You're working that funnel. That funnel is really important all through the developer experience of using that API until you finally can get them to some kind of integration step. So I think that's really incredible. Now, assuming that you've got their interest, you can monetize this experience in some kind of way. That leads you to pricing, and I think that was actually another one of the really enlightening sections in the report where you talk a lot about. There's a lot to think about in the pricing space, isn't there?
There is, and so this goes back to what you mentioned around landing developers first. And so you're not trying to sell to the developer itself. What you're trying to do is get them to pay a token amount. Maybe it's $50 a month, maybe it's $100 a month, because they're at that point, they already see value in the platform, and they had, the audacity to go ask their manager, for the credit card. And so by the time that sales is getting engaged, a lot of times the developers already paid, for a couple months worth of service. They're paying that $50 a month. They already have a working app they can show to the management team. And so what we like to call this is selling through developers to the decision makers. And in this case, the decision maker is looking for, maybe it's volume discounts, maybe it's Okta integration or Salesforce integration, certain compliance requirements that they might need to meet. And this, if you look at this process, that also means you have some type of usage-based pricing model, right? And so going from $100 a month to suddenly you have a $10,000 a month bill, that's of course what we want to do as an API product, but it's also a very delicate balance because you don't want to piss off developers. No one wants to be blamed for that $10,000 a month bill. And so how do you make sure you have the right process to identify these different developers where their usage is growing over time, week over week or month over month, and then that's when sales should get engaged, saying, hey, you're going to have this very large bill. Let me work with you on some discounts. Maybe it's through volume discounts or something else to make sure we're really meeting your needs and you're able to get the most value out of what you're paying here. And so that's really what sales is.
Yeah, and again, to me, that goes right to the consultative selling idea. What you really just kind of described is, look, we see you're using the API, and that's really great. This is what our experience tells us. Let's get together and talk about setting up a package, right? That's one of the things we talk about in the report as well, is getting a package that, like you say, meets your needs and stays focused, so you don't get surprises. And you don't, like you say, tick off somebody along the way. I think that's another thing that's unique in the API space. Because you're focused on the time to first working app, you've already got them kind of hooked, right? And now what you want to do is you literally kind of want to land the fish in the boat. You want to get them so that they can do this consistently and comfortably and be a great advocate for your API. Nothing lasts forever. Everything changes over time. And you mentioned deprecation as well, which is another part of that cycle. And again, that's a huge topic. There's a lot to go on, but it's important to think about deprecation pretty early in the process, isn't it?
It is. And so one of the worst things you can do when you have some type of developer ecosystem is to piss off developers.
Yeah.
And a fast way you do that is if you don't communicate changes or impact to either themselves or their integrations or their applications. And when we talk about deprecation, it's really important to have a process around how do you identify the impact, whether it's to your own revenue or to your developers, right? So, how many different developers are impacted? What do they have to do in order to migrate? And then let them know. It's much better to over communicate than to under communicate, and give them plenty of lead up time before that API is actually shut off. So it might mean, you have to notify developers 6 months ahead of time saying, this and this day is when it will be shut off. Lastly, continue to remind them, hey, you're using, this API that's soon to be deprecated. It looked like you had 20,000 API calls in the last 7 days. This is the geolocation or the user agent that we're seeing the traffic from. So they know exactly which integrations might be causing that traffic, because a lot of times you don't know. If I'm a developer, I'm using all these different APIs, using all these different endpoints. How do I know if I'm using this deprecated endpoint or not? So providing that capability and that visibility is really important, whether it's through email, through embedded dashboards, something else inside your developer portal.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I think was so valuable in when we were going through the report, and that is this notion of helping the developers out, because they might have a team in another location, another part of the world, another part of the country, just another floor in the building that we didn't know that they're also using the API as well, right? So, like you said, geolocating, helping them figure out, what the details are, so they can work through exactly who it is that they need to help upgrade. And I think that's a really, really important part of it. That's another example of really living the developer life and helping developers work through that process. So that's API strategy for decision makers, and I hope we'll see you next time in another episode.